Welcome to our next topic, that is immediately invoked function expressions. Now let's take a look at what they are. So sometimes in JavaScript we need a function that is only executed once and then never again. So basically a function that disappears right after it's once called. And this might not appear to take much sense right now, but we actually need this technique, for example, with something called asynchronous or await. So how could we do that? Well, we could simply create a function and then only execute it once. Now let's create a function, right? Const run once function. Now let's write console.log. This will never run again. Now let's call the function run once. Now see here it is displayed in console. Now here we want to actually execute a function immediately and not even having to save it somewhere. So this is how we do that, and we simply write the function expression itself. So for that let's write function, and then without assigning a variable, let's log this in console, give this statement. Now let's reload. See here we have an error. That is, here function statements require a function name. That is because in JavaScript here it expects a function statement. Because we simply started with the function expression, we can still trick JavaScript into thinking that this is just an expression. And now we can simply wrap all of this code using the parentheses. And so now we basically transformed the statement that we had before into an expression. So if we save this, now we have no error. But also this expression didn't execute it. So here this function, we can then immediately call it. And so with this, we will get now this text here locked to the console to string. So with this, just simply call here that function. Now let's reload. And indeed now here we have the result. So again here this is really just the function value. So it's just a function expression, and then immediately we call it here. So this is why the pattern is called the immediately invoked function expression, or IIFE. So immediately invoked function expression, and the same would of course also work for an arrow function. So let's write here and then give the arrow function. Let's copy this one, paste, and here I am changing that this will also never run again. Now if we try to call it like this here, it does not work here. And so we actually don't get an error, but also nothing happens. So we first need to wrap this into parentheses and then we call it. So now let's wrap this into parentheses again. And then call the function. So now let's see the result reload. See here we got the result. So these are the two ways of writing the function in immediately invoked function expressions. And so why was this pattern actually invented means, We already know that functions create scopes, right? And what's important here is that one scope does not have access to variables from an inner scope. So for example, right here in the global scope, we don't have to access any variables that are defined in the scope of any of these functions here. So for example, let's write that here I am writing const is private, that is equal 23, and then as we try to access it out here, write console.log, we already know that it's not going to work. Is private. See here, this is private is not defined. That is because the scope chain only works the other way around. So inner scope would have access to anything defined outside here in the global scope. But the global scope does not have access in the inside of the scope. So in this case of the scope created by this function here, therefore we say that all data undefined inside a scope is private. We also say that this data is encapsulated. So for example, this is private here is encapsulated inside of the function scope that's created. And data encapsulation and data privacy are extremely important concepts in programming. So many times we actually need to protect our variables for from being accidentally overwritten by some other parts of the program or even with external scripts or libraries. And I am going to talk in detail about these concepts in the object-oriented programming section. But for now, keep in mind that it's important to hide variables and that scopes are a good tool for doing this. And the immediately invoked function expressions were invented. So basically this pattern here, so this is really a feature of the Java programming. It's more a pattern that simple developers are using and that then by the many developers. So do you remember what also creates a scope in year 6? And that's right, where variables declared with let or const create their own scope inside a block. And we learned that in the behind of the scene section also. And when we create a block like this, just write here is private equal 23, then the outside can still not access is private. So let's comment out this. Now let's write console.log is private. And once again, we cannot access this variable, while on the other hand, let's write var not private, that is equal 45 something. Now would of course it be accessible. And let's write console.log not private. Now let's make this in comments. Reload. See here we have 45. We got the result. That is because of here we have declared this with var, and therefore it does not completely ignore this block here essentially. And this is the reason why now in modern JavaScript immediately invoked function expressions are not that used anymore, because if all we want is to create a new scope for data privacy, all we need to do is to just create a block like this, and there is no need in creating a function to create a new scope, unless of course we want to use a var for our variables. We already know we probably shouldn't do that. So now on the other hand, if what we want that to execute a function just once, then the IIFE, so the immediately invoked function expressions is still in the way go. even with the modern JavaScript, and we will actually see a great use of doing that IIFE. So this is all about the session. Continue in the next one. Thank you.